as I've seen you're able to deliver it. I'm not sure you can turn around to a second grader and say, your mind is capable of, I think it's a much better thing to reinforce the notion of real versus fantasy. And the discussion that you were talking about in terms of that these are stories about how people interact. This is real to a child. A child really deals with these things. Not just from when he's in second grade, but also, as adults we deal with it too, which is why some adults find Harry Potter a lot of fun to read. I was just pulling back in terms of, there's an oft-quoted saying, there's Arthur C. Clarke, says, any technology sufficiently advanced is indistinguishable from magic.
To the previous generation.
Huh?
To the previous generation.
To the previous generation.
Well, yeah, there's another quote that he was echoing, which was, witchcraft to the ignorant, simple science to the learned. That the discussion of whether something is magic and is, I don't think it's the right focus. If we're worrying about conjuring, we're back in the Middle Ages. We're back, the rabbis, great learned men of 1,000 years ago, 2,000 years ago, really, for goodness, believed in magic. It was wrong. We, I think, today can turn around and say, yeah, magic is wrong. It's not real.
Except for those whom it is. Andy?
Yeah, I was reading Cousins' book, his Guide to Enlightenment in Torah. He's very famous. I don't know if anyone knows him, but he said there that Hitler Yamach Shema was very involved with this black magic, sacrificial rites, which he got a lot of power from. I have no idea, but I'm just wondering, just theoretically, that if there was a real power, and even on Shabbos, you can't break Shabbos, but sometimes, you're allowed to save a life. If there was really this war against evil, let's say in that time, and if people would use magic, if there was really power in it, would that be allowed? I'm just wondering, because, like Yaakov by Lavan, he was able to do trickery because he was confronting Lavan. So it's just maybe a question, but I was just wondering that.
Everything.
Well, I have two things. First of all, if, we say that God puts stuff on earth for a reason, so if either magic isn't real, so we shouldn't be worried about it, or magic is real, and it's on earth for a reason, and that you can have good or bad. And secondly, I was hearing people say that magic wasn't the main focus. I have a hypothesis that magic wasn't the main focus in the books, that it was actually showing the Holocaust. Because it all through the books you can see evidence of the Holocaust in it.
Want to be specific?
Like with Voldemort, you know how some people say that, I've heard two things, that Hitler had a grandmother who was Jewish. Well, Voldemort his father was mudblood. Well, not mudblood, he was a muggle. So he was a mudblood, and he was going around killing all the other muggles and mudbloods and everything.
And that
As part of her...
Harry and Dumbledore know that he's come back, and nobody will believe that there's this real danger. People
Well,
are
he
being
really
turned
shows
in,
how
disappearing.
the press can be taken over by a dictatorship and put into propaganda mode, and it would fit not only the Nazi regime but other totalitarian regimes. That's one of the ways in which she gets it. She is able to give us these images that we recognize from other contexts.
And to say that the book is bad is like saying that the Holocaust never happened.
Well, your first point, though, I found also very interesting. I mean, for instance, in the Gemara Sanhedrin, Rabbi Hanina responds to a witch by saying, "Ein od milvado." There's nothing but God. So either what you're doing is effective or not effective, it doesn't really matter. God controls the events. And it's very similar to what you said. I mean, I think your analysis is correct. That first either or that you gave is quite accurate. And that's really, I think, you can defend that quite nicely from the Gemara. That exactly your approach.
And also, from like witch, the meaning of witch is healer. So I don't understand how that is bad.
Yeah, I mean, again, in the Gemara, the term that's used is chashef, machashefa, and that's someone who is denying the natural causality of the world in order to manipulate it for their own ends, and that's what's negative about it. It's not a question of, you know, I mean, it's a halachic category.
So I'm a little concerned here that what we're actually worried about is fiction and fantasy at all in our kids' lives as a waste of time spent on stuff that's not real. And I'm wondering if the three of you could each think of one work of childhood fiction which you're willing to heartily endorse all of its presumptions, religious, theological, and moral.
Oh, it's not like that.
Winnie the Pooh.
Chodesh Iyar.
You know, the issue here is, you know, the question of how to use non-Torah literature in a Torah context. I mean, that's the issue.
No, I understand that. I'm just not sure what the difference is between.
No, it's in everything. I mean, it should be the same. My feeling is the same critical approach. It happens to be that the Harry Potter thing is a big rage, and very, very popular, and it has suffused children's minds with a whole universe of a certain type. And I think as educators, we have to be aware of the impact that it has on children's understanding of reality and of Torah and of spirituality and also of relationships and all these issues. And my point is that we should have a more engaged, critical wrestling with this rather than ignore the implications of the spiritual and moral world of, well, let's say the spiritual world of Harry Potter, because our kids are stuck with this. Okay, so let's start a discussion about this, and Torah has a lot to say about these topics. Let's get into that discussion rather than pretending that it's merely a mechanical backdrop for what's going on. It's part of the whole worldview of the series, and our children are now being infused with this worldview. So let's deal with it in a creative way. And I'm not so much to be afraid of it, but as to leverage it in a positive sense. Anna and then Sean.
In Harry Potter, people are either born with magic or they aren't. Like Ariana Dumbledore tried to suppress the magic inside her and it drove her crazy. How can we say that something so fundamental to these people is evil?
Well, that's the fantasy world. I mean,
Well, yeah, but still.
so maybe magicians are made and not born. In terms of the reality of it, it's I say, within the context of the book, Harry Potter's a good guy. I'm not doubting that. The question is what, but he's also he's a fictional figure. The question is that there are certain real assumptions about the world that are in these books that I think we should wrestle with in a critical way.
Did she really die from, did she go crazy from suppressing her magic, or was it also a result of the trauma that she went through?
Probably both. Other book says that she tried to contain it, but she couldn't.
Well, she's an addict as well.
Because her own mother gets herself killed because of it.
Right. I think that's actually a really great question, and I don't know how long we're going to go. So I think that question is a really powerful question because it talks about really how. So there's a question that really all our kids are wrestling with, but not about magic. Right? So our kids are wrestling with about sexuality. Right? I assume that was the question, really. Which is, what do we do if we have a claim that there is some powerful drive in human beings, right? That there is, and that the attempt to suppress it will be psychologically damaging. Now, it's actually very impressive of her in that book to make that outcome be the result of trauma and abuse, as opposed to just as opposed to presenting it just as, just telling a story of Harry Potter trapped in the Muggle world who goes crazy because he's not allowed to be a wizard. But I think that's really now. Look, I think that this goes back to Deborah's question, that we really have to make a fundament. Reading critically is one thing, but I don't know that we want to create kids who, or it's plausible to create kids who every time they read a book, they are thinking very, very critically and directly about the book. Mostly you read a book, and the book becomes part of you. And you read lots of books. So really, I wonder if the issue is not so much to create critical thinking about the book as how we create fixed points in the kids, so there's certain things that, that you're confident that no matter what they read, that they will be able to, so this is a critical theological question. Do we believe that every aspect of a human being, that God creates human beings, must have a positive expression, such that if we were to claim the Torah bans it, then we have to deny the reality of such a That's a great question. I don't know that thinking critically about Harry Potter's presentation of magic is the right way to do that, but I think we need to inculcate some kind of vision of how we relate to powerful human drives.
Well, that's you're abstracting the magic issue and translating it into a kind of, it's using it as a metaphor. And I understand that magic is used sometimes as a metaphor in the book, and she's using it that way. But on the other hand, it's what the book's about. It's so pervasive. I mean, that you to ignore it, I think is just not to read it honestly.
I'm fine with that, but I'm wondering is it getting to think critically about Harry Potter, or really if you were thinking of a positive, if we had, the underlying issue is, I think our educational system largely proceeds on the presumption, as I articulated earlier, that the Rambam is right, and that magic doesn't work. So that means that we have a system that can't do what you're asking for, or what I'm asking for in this case, which is let's teach kids what we think, and then mela. When they read books, they'll think of it in that framework. You don't have to read the book critically. That's just who they are. So now, in the particular case of magic, the disconnect is that we don't have a system that's willing to teach a positive vision of what spiritual power is, because we have a large group of people who either don't know enough or don't believe it. So that creates a particular way of relating to this book where we're not communicating with each other, where we're not. So I think it's a really interesting challenge, that you put out, which is what would it be like to teach, what would our educational system be? And I imagine that in the Hasidic community, to some extent, they do that. What does it mean to educate kids, or at least to open the possibility for kids, that they have a serious Kabbalistic worldview that enables them to understand, to think critically about what it would mean.
The Gemara doesn't have to be Kabbalah. The Gemara is full of this spirituality.
Right. So how do we teach that?
The fact that our kids get their spirituality from Harry Potter and not from the Gemara is extraordinary. I mean, I think we got to really look at this. And I don't think it's such a benign phenomenon. I really don't. Sure.
How much magical thinking is in the Kabbalah? I don't know much about it, but is there a lot of magic in the Kabbalah as well?
Well, it wouldn't be magic. It's different. I mean, we could distinguish it. I mean, it's straight use of mind rather than using any props. It's not attempting to subvert natural causality, at least when it's done properly. There's discussion of, what's called Kabbalah Ma'asit. Ma'asit, the practical Kabbalah. That's considered a questionable practice among Kabbalists themselves. And then there's straight Kabbalistic practice, which usually is using the mind in very, very direct, sort of contemplative ways.
But not with so-called magical thinking.
Not with manipulating in a magical way. But magic is manipulation of the world through subverting the causal process in some way. Kabbalists don't do that.
Okay, I think we should take one more question, and then we should maybe go 2-minute last statement. Who do you want?
Right?
So it seemed to me like a reframe in the conversation was how do we read non-Torah literature through Torah, for a Torah context. I would love in closing to hear from each of the three panelists, you know, your top wish for what should be a Torah conversation we have with our teens about Harry Potter.
That's a great closing thing. Why don't we take 30 seconds to think about it, and then we'll close with that. You want to go first? Where do you go first? No, actually, when Amir asked me if I was going to be moderator tonight, I said that I saw my role as extremifier.
I think I'd like to phrase it in terms of, you know, what I've learned this evening and what I would, and based on that, what I'd like to see. I think I understand more the consideration of how the magical aspects of Harry Potter can be perceived, especially by those who have exposure to the Jewish systems of spirituality. And I do think that your feelings about it are unique because of your background, because of your familiarity, and I think that many of the sensitivities and maybe even the dangers may be because maybe totally, most of the readers may be totally oblivious and unaffected, but that doesn't mean that there is no benefit to exposing them to the riches in our tradition. I would love to see somebody qualified write on this subject, or speak on the subject and make those classes available on a broader basis than just an individual kehillah, because there are people who would like to know. I think that would I change my conversation with my teens about this? I don't see myself going home and telling my teens, be very careful, because a lot of the things that you read in Harry Potter that you were so excited about, they are, you know, could be a chiyuv skila. I don't see myself saying that. I don't think I would change the way I would present Harry Potter, but I think I would look for more opportunities to share the fact that we have a rich spiritual heritage. More of the sort of guests like Chaim Sober or others who might be able to convey it accurately. And I think I could see adding another essay to my essay contest in my Harry Potter nights. Can you find things in Harry Potter that you think are not in consonance with Judaism? In addition to finding things where they do agree, find things, begin to exercise your critical faculty and find things where they disagree.
I appreciate that. This is a transforming conversation. It's great that it is. The fact that our teens, and even younger children, as Jerry said, our teens are attracted to this, I think shows they have a hunger and a thirst for spirituality, for seeing deeper possibilities in the world and the wonder of the world. And that's an appetite that we need to be able to nourish as Jewish educators. I don't think we're doing a great job, I have to say, myself included. to allow, to open up to our children a more robust awareness of the spiritual riches of Torah, I think is really important. And that in itself will give them a critical basis, or let's say a basis for reading this kind of literature critically. I think that's the important part of it. I grant to Rabbi Klapper, it's not a question of sitting down and analyzing, academically, this particular passage in Harry Potter versus this halakha. But you could do that. I think would be a great exercise, and our children should have that halachic expertise as well. But it's a question of really nourishing them spiritually, so that books like this will not throw them off a Torah track, but it's something that they can see the fun in it. They can enjoy it, but they can also read it with an awareness that we have something else, and it's even more exciting, and it's even more profound. So this is the job I'd like to see happen, a much more robust spiritual education for our children.
So you're basically saying that when the Torah says you can't consult all of these types of people, but rather Navi mikirbecha me'achecha kamoni yakim lecha Hashem elokecha. So when we say, well, we don't have that anymore, you're saying we've got more than you realize.
We've got more than you realize, absolutely.
And you're proposing an entire new area of Jew, not new, but new in the sense that our curricula do not have it, and you're volunteering to begin.
There you go. Thank you.
Okay, I want to thank Rabbi Rosenberg both for tonight and for his for coming to visit us this entire Shabbat. I often say I'm very privileged to live in a community and I moved to this community in part to hear Rabbi Sendor. So now, because Rabbi Rosenberg is really the only rabbi I traveled to hear. I'm very glad that he traveled. To allow me.
It's been a wonderful shot.
To allow me to hear him this time. I thank Rabbi Sendor, which I think we should all acknowledge, for a very Gryffindorian willingness to take on the very difficult side of the conversation. Walking into a room where we can tell that that most of us have read Harry Potter with enjoyment, and some of us, like me, to admit as post-teenagers, having read it and actually still reading it and enjoying and enjoying it. I think that a really productive thing that comes out of the conversation is really this, right? Is that we haven't really addressed what do we do when we hit those psukim in Chumash, right? Do we just dismiss them? We say that that's irrelevant. We never talk about it, and it's relegated to the realm of of tzarat habayit, right? Of leprosy of the house. Right? We don't know what it is, right? So what happens, or is that an aspect that we need to address? And it may be that whether we are Rambam or Ramban followers, the notion that this is irrelevant to the lives of teens, right, is something that you're calling to our attention. That we're not, right? That those of us who are non, I don't like spirituality as a term, but who are not into paranormal, parascientific powers, let's say, or parascientific capacities, are projecting that onto our teens, right, in ways which are not correct. As others leave, because I think I should be required to answer Dr. Ziptrigger's question also somewhat. So I think that this has been, I think to me, one of the really interesting things about the series of the Harry Potter is not the only book that plays it out, is that it sets up a world where it's not clear that there are any limits on human power. The most powerful curse in Harry Potter is Avada Kedavra, but I don't know that there isn't a curse that couldn't blow up the world. And that notion of it, right, the extent to which we want, our children to see the world that way, in which everything, right, in which there is nothing the human mind can't accomplish, whether we prefer to educate them to see the world as something which really is quite resilient, and which human beings have to come to place with themselves as a small cog in it. That seems to make a really powerful question that could emerge from it. Thank you all very, very much for coming. It's important
that this conversation is tomorrow night. We have a Yom HaShoah program. It's really important to give kavod to people who've gone through extraordinary experiences, and for all of us as well, it's part of our deeper spiritual education as well. So please come out tomorrow night at 7:30.
We've got some refreshments in the social hall.